Praise the Lord. Bethel AG Church ഒഫീഷ്യൽ യൂട്യൂബ് ചാനലിലും അതുപോലെ അപ്പോസ്തോലിക വിശകലനങ്ങൾ എന്ന ഫേസ്ബുക്ക് പേജിലും ദ ന്യൂ നാഷണൽ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോളിസി എന്നുള്ള 2020 ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ പോളിസിയെക്കുറിച്ച് പ്രൊഫസർ സുകു സാമുവൽ തോമസ് അവർ അവതരിപ്പിക്കുന്ന ഈ പ്രസൻറ്റേഷനിൽ കടന്നു വരാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്ന എല്ലാവർക്കും, ഇന്ന് വീക്ഷിക്കുന്ന എല്ലാവർക്കും കർത്താവായ യേശുക്രിസ്തുവിൻ്റെ നിസ്തുല്യ നാമത്തിൽ സ്നേഹവന്ദനങ്ങളെ അറിയിക്കുന്നു. ബെഥൽ എജി ചർച്ചിൻ്റെ ലീഡർഷിപ്പിൽ നിൽക്കുന്ന പ്രൊഫസർ സുകു തോമസ് സാമുവൽ മാത്രമല്ല, ബെഥൽ എജി ചർച്ചിൻ്റെ പോളിസി അനുസരിച്ച് ആരെങ്കിലും യങ്സ്റ്റേഴ്സ് എവിടെയെങ്കിലും പ്രയോജനപ്പെടുവാൻ കൺസ്ട്രക്റ്റീവായി പോസിറ്റീവായി ഏതെങ്കിലും കാര്യങ്ങളിൽ ഇടപെടാൻ സാധിക്കുമെങ്കിൽ അവരെ പ്രോത്സാഹിപ്പിക്കുന്ന ഒരു അറ്റ്മോസ്ഫിയർ ബെഥൽ ചർച്ചിലുള്ളതിനാൽ ബ്രദർ സജോ തനിക്ക് ലഭിച്ചിരിക്കുന്ന താലന്തുകൾ ദൈവനാമത്തിൻ്റെ മഹത്വത്തിനായി പ്രയോജനപ്പെടുത്തുവാൻ അപ്പോസ്തോലിക വിശകലനങ്ങൾ എന്ന ഫേസ്ബുക്ക് പേജ് തുടങ്ങിയതിലേക്ക് ഈ പ്രക്ഷേപണം ഞങ്ങൾ എക്സ്റ്റെൻഡ് ചെയ്യുകയാണ്. വരുന്നുള്ള ദിവസങ്ങളിൽ പ്രത്യേക സബ്ജക്ട്സിനെ കുറിച്ച്, പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് തൃത്വം എന്നുള്ളൊരു സബ്ജക്റ്റിനെ കുറിച്ചും ബ്രദർ സജോ ഈ ഫേസ്ബുക്ക് പേജിൽ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി പ്രസ്താവിക്കുന്നതായിരിക്കും. അതും ബെഥൽ എജി ചർച്ചിൻ്റെ മറ്റ് ചാനൽസിൽ നമുക്ക് വീക്ഷിക്കുവാൻ സാധിക്കും എന്നോർപ്പിക്കട്ടെ. ഭാരതത്തിൻ്റെ ചരിത്രത്തിൽ ക്രിസ്തീയ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്കും, ക്രിസ്ത്യൻ ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷൻസിനും വിദ്യാഭ്യാസത്തിൻ്റെ മേഖലയിൽ ഒരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട പങ്കുണ്ട് എന്നുള്ള വസ്തുത മനസ്സിൽ വെച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഒരു പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ഗെയിം ചേഞ്ചർ, ആകെപ്പാടെ തലങ്ങളെ മാറ്റുവാൻ പ്രസക്തമായ ഒരു പുതിയ നാഷണൽ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോളിസി നമ്മളുടെ ഗവൺമെൻറ് കൊണ്ടുവരുന്നത്. We are really excited about this thing that could be a game changer. അത് ക്രിസ്ത്യൻ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയിലുള്ള സ്റ്റുഡൻസിനും ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷൻസിനും നമ്മുടെ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്ക് എങ്ങനെ ലിവറേജ് ചെയ്യുവാൻ സാധിക്കും എന്നുള്ളതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് പ്രൊഫസർ സുകു തോമസ് സാമുവൽ വളരെ ബ്രീഫായി തരുന്ന ഈ ഒരു അനാലിസിസ് we would really look forward to it. Professor Suku Thomas Samuel, we are so happy to have you with us. I would request you to kindly take over the time and please help us understand as you observe the good things, the strengths and the opportunities in the National New Education Policy 2020. Over to you.
Praise the Lord. Thank you, Pastor, for this opportunity. First and foremost, I want to thank the leadership of Bethel AG Church for organizing such a wonderful platform, as well as extending the resources to other platforms and sharing the knowledge and the understanding. I also want to thank the leadership as well as Pastor for organizing and providing me with an opportunity to share my perspectives, as well as give an overview about the new national education policy which has been brought out by the government. So in that light, I just quickly would like to bring up a brief presentation for you so that we could have a very structured as well as a meaningful discussion as well as a review of this policy which has been brought about. So the talk I would like to divide into two parts. The first part of the talk, I would like to give you a perspective and the reforms which are brought about by the new education policy. And then towards the end, what could be the expected outcome? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities that we are likely to incur as a part of this education policy? So at first, let me start off by giving you an overview of the education policy. If you look at the history of India,
Can I interrupt for a minute, Professor Suku Thomas? There is a comment that the audio isn't loud enough. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Okay, is it any better now?
It's much better. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, thank you, Pastor. So if you look at the history of India and we look at the policies, the education policies which were brought out, we've had only three major policies which were brought out. The first was in 1968, which was based on the Kothari Commission back then, and then was in 1986, and then after 1986, if you look at a major reform was brought out only in 2020. So if you look at the business scenario, if you look at the world, if you look at the science and technology at a whole, we are living in a VUCA world. That's how Harvard Business Review put it across. We live in a volatile, ambiguous, and a highly changing world. So if you look at the entire scenario for the last 20 to 30 years, we've not had much major reforms which were brought about in the education sector at large. So this was actually the need of the hour. We were anticipating, or we were looking forward for bringing about a major restructuring in the education segment. So a little bit about the backdrop to the new education policy. How did it come? How did a series of events result in this policy coming out in 2020? 2015, United Nations brought out their Sustainable Development Goal, and they came out with their uh, ambitious 2030 project, as a result of which one of the social development goals that was put forward. In fact, the fourth goal that was put forward was for quality education. Now, Indian government, they supported these sustainable development goals, and in that light, in 2015, a committee was appointed under the Secretary T.S.R. Subramaniam, and the committee carried out some elementary studies, and in a year they submitted their findings to the government. And what they had to propose back then was that there was a need of a new policy which had to be brought out, which had to address a lot of gaps in the education structure, in the education sector. There was also a huge demand to standardize the education framework, because what happened in the Indian education sector was we had multiple regulators. So let me just give you a simple example. If you look at the technical education, it is all regulated by AICT. But if you look at all the other domains of education, it is regulated by UGC, it is medicine, it is regulated by All India Medical Sciences, so etc. So the entire scenario in the education sector was we are having multiple regulators, and we were really not getting anywhere with those. So there was a need to standardize the education framework. And the focus had to be to improve the quality and credibility. So if you look at the migration of student community from India to Western worlds, it was really huge. So this is all what was leading to brain drain, and that is how we would close it. And also there were a lot of implementation gaps which were identified in the existing education policy, the policy of 1982. So, based on this, a nine-panel member was appointed. It was headed by Professor Krishnaswamy Kasturi Rankan. He is a man of high stature and as well as credibility. He was the former director of ISRO. He was the scientific advisor to the former government, etc. So, a man of high reputation, high credibility, and he was appointed to head a panel which was formed to come out with a policy. So the team worked from 2016, 2019. They came out with a draft. The draft was published in the public domain for consultation. Now, as the previous education policies, the government adopted the top-down um, review approach. Various consultations were conducted at different levels. So starting all the way from panchayat, district level, state level, then national level. A lot of experts were brought in from various domains, academia, industry, media, etc. And a lot of vigorous consultations were conducted. And based on that, the government brought out the national education policy in 2020. Now, if you look at the education policy at large, you can broadly divide into two parts. The one part of it focuses on school education, and the second part of it focuses on higher education. So in that backdrop, some of the reforms which were put forward as a part of the new education policy was that to revamp the existing school education structure. So as of now, the structure that we have is what is referred to as the 10+2. So the focus of school education starts from age 6. Okay, now this was a major concern because When a lot of scientific research was carried out, they figured out a child's brain development starts as early as 2.5 to 3 years. But our formal education or our regulated education structure starts only from 6 years. So there was a huge gap. The government wanted to address this part. So as a result of which the entire education structure has been revamped from 10 plus 2, we've moved to the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. So here, the focus of the education starts as early as 3 years old. So based on that, the school education has been divided into four parts. We have the foundational, preparatory, middle, and then secondary. So the thrust on the education now starts as early as 3 years. So let me just give you a simple example. I'm pretty sure we all have come across some of these institutions like Kidsy, Little Millennium, etc. Now, uh, what these chain of preschools were actually doing was they were investing heavily into research and development. They were coming up with their own, teaching methodologies. They were coming up with their own teaching aids. As a result of which, sometimes what happens is the kids who study in these institutions or these schools end up, faring better than those who have not. So this is because these institutions have done a lot of careful research. They've done a lot of careful analysis based on which they have designed their teaching pedagogies or they've designed their teaching processes. So as a result of which these kids used to perform way better than those who have not. So this is because the brain development used to take as early as 3 years, and we've not really done much to address that gap of 3 years. That is, uh, in our case, in an Indian scenario, what used to happen was our regulated education structure starts all the way from 6 years. So this is one of the major revamp which has been brought about. Next thing that has been brought about was there is a significant reduction in the curriculum for the students. So I'm pretty sure kids must be excited about this. But at the same time, when the government is, or when the policy states out, gives an outline to reduce curriculum, it's just not blindly cutting out topics. Okay, so in line or in place of the curriculum which has been reduced, they have proposed a lot of other aspects. So one of the aspects which has brought in is vocational courses. So for example, I have a daughter, she's 4 years old, and of lately what I found out that she's got a passion for, she's really passionate about screwdrivers, players, spanners, etc. So it shows that she's interested in a specific domain. Now, unfortunately, our present education structure does not facilitate a kid or a child to go ahead and develop their skills in that area. But if you look at the Western countries, they give a lot of thrust to these vocational areas. So, which means as early as school level, our children could get accustomed with some of these skills, such as plumbing, carpentry, etc. So now, what happens is that they are exposed to a whole new realm. Their minds are now open to a lot more opportunities. So as a result of which they tend to be more serious. They tend to understand what their passion areas are. It will enable them to choose their careers more carefully. Okay, so being from the education industry or being in the education sector, on an average, I come across around. I teach close to in the course that I handle, I teach close to 300 to 400 students a year as a part of the management studies. But what I've realized is that once these students graduate, they end up finding their passion areas in elsewhere. So, for example, there's a student of mine. He's found out it took him 3 years of BBA to realize that he's really passionate about photography. Now, that's because the present education structure does not facilitate them to, focus or specialize, or they're not exposed to these kind of domains. So this is one major area where the present education structure, education policy focuses to address. Another thing is the school education today, with the new policy in picture, they are encouraged to follow a multilingual approach. So according to the policy, the students must have an exposure to at least 3 languages. Now, at the same time, the policy also outlines that the state government as well as the respective schools have the choice, they have the freedom to choose the language of instruction. So indirectly, what happens is there is a thrust for the mother tongue as well as regional languages. Now, we are living in a scenario where there's a lot of, urbanization which is happening, where people move in from, rural areas to urban areas, as a result of which they're detached from their ethnicity, they are detached from their family, they're detached from, and they are exposed to a whole new realm. So what happens is they tend to forget their roots. They tend to forget the language that their parents and their grandparents are accustomed to. So this is one area which the education policy has addressed. Then another thing is the policy also outlines the freedom to incorporate foreign languages. So pretty soon, at a school level, even at an elementary level, we could have the schools coming forward and offering languages like Japanese, French, etc. So students are now having, now we have to realize that the entire business scenario is going global. The concept of local is completely ruled out. We are going global. Today, we have the concept of multinational companies, which means companies are today no longer confined by geographical boundaries. So to address all these issues, we need to think beyond boundaries. So these are some areas that the present education policy would be focusing on. Next major important aspect that the policy has outlined is today school education could be multidisciplinary in nature. What that means is, so let me just share a personal experience. When I was completing with my 10th and when I was moving to my +1, I had to study what is called as a science stream. So in that science stream, my choices of subjects were fixed. So I had to study biology, maths, chemistry, physics, and then yeah. So these were the subjects that I had. It is a package. I don't have a freedom of choice. I don't have the flexibility to decide what would be the subjects that I would like to learn. Now, some of these subjects I was not really very passionate about. So instead of that, why don't we give our students an opportunity to choose the subjects instead of giving them a fixed package? So you could have kids tomorrow studying biology as well as sociology. These are poles apart. But if that's what his area of interest is, there is no harm for him to study that. So for example, way back in my younger days, I was really passionate about finance, but I really didn't have an opportunity to study finance because of the so-called package system. So this is one area that the education policy would be addressing. The policy it would become multidisciplinary in nature. Another thing is the policy clearly rules out the annual exam system. So in the present scenario, what happens is we have an academic cycle. At the end of the academic year, the students are supposed to write an exam, and then based on the results in that exam, they would be promoted to the next academic year. So this is the routine thing which is happening. But now that annual system is going to be taken off, students will have to give their exams when they're in class 3, 5, and 8 instead. Then another thing is the entire concept of board exams is going to be revamped. The nature or the pattern with which class 10 and class 12 exams are conducted, that is going to be revamped. The policy also proposes establishment of an assessment body, which is nicknamed as PARAK, stands for Performance Assessment Review and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. So this body is going to prescribe the guidelines for carrying out the assessments. So for example, if you look at how some of the schools would be conducting exams, it would vary from institution to institution. So instead of that, they would be giving unified guidelines across the nation, and then schools are expected to format. And also, if you look at, maybe let me give a simple example, the report card some of our children would be getting when they're studying in their schools. It would vary from institution to institution. The fields, the columns which are disclosed over there would vary. So as a part of this body, what they would be doing is they would be giving a common guideline. Certain parameters has to be So one of the most challenging this thing that I saw in this proposal was the proposal to introduce 360 review. Students themselves will be given an opportunity to carry out a self analysis. How far have they fared in terms of academics? Another thing is the concept of having a board exam once in a year that's going to be ruled out. It would be conducted twice a year, and they would be given multiple attempts to clear. Another vigorous thing that is going to be brought about is the board exams will have two parts. You will have an objective as well as you will have a descriptive. So that's about the school education part. And now let me get on to the higher education part. Now, the policy proposes eliminating multiple regulators in the domain of education and having one single regulator, which is going to be the Higher Education Council of India. Now, for example, at my institution, the college where I study, where I work, where I teach, we offer degree programs which are affiliated or uh, which needs the approval from UGC, whereas we have the Masters in Business Administration, which requires the approval from AICT. So, uh, but if you look at the landscape as a whole, we are talking about education. So, irrespective of who regulates it, what you have to remember is it is the student who's benefiting at the end of the day. So, instead of having multiple regulators, the policy very ambitiously points out the proposal to have one single regulator to manage the entire education structure. Then the Higher Education Council of India, they would have three verticals. The first vertical would be NHERC, which is responsible for regulating the education on a whole. Then you will have the National Accreditation Council, NAC, which will be responsible for looking into the quality of education which will be rendered by the institutions. And then we will have the Higher Education Grants Council, which will be responsible for funding and financing universities and colleges. So instead of having multiple regulators, it's all going to be under one single umbrella. And under that one single umbrella, they will have three divisions, and these three divisions, their responsibilities are very clearly defined, and they would be taking care of the respective aspects that they've been entrusted with. Another ambitious game changer that has been brought about is the National Testing Agency, NTA, the very same body which is responsible for conducting NEET exams. Now, there's a proposal to introduce a common entrance exam, and the marks of these bodies, or the marks of this exam, would be considered as an eligibility criteria for admissions for higher education. So, for example, if you look at, let me just give you an example. If you were seeking an admission for an MBA in India, you have a wide array of exams that are available. For example, you have CAT exam, you have MAT exam, MAT exam, then you have CMAT exam. So why now this is really confusing, and it may be burdensome for the student from a financial perspective. So why is there a need for multiple agencies coming forward and conducting these exams? Instead of this, you unify everything, put it under one umbrella, and then let the education institutions rely on the results of this particular test and then give admission. Then, now talking a little bit more about the higher education, bachelor's degree is going to be multidisciplinary in nature. Now, what this means is that even now, if you look at the education, present degree education, or if you look at the present bachelor's degree, when a student enrolls for a course, there would be a certain set of subjects that the student is expected to study. So, for example, I teach for BBA, Bachelor of Business Administration. So my students are expected to study marketing, HR, uh, economics, finance, accounting, etc. They don't have a choice. The subjects that they have to study are fixed. Okay, so instead of having those fixed subjects, let the student enroll for a degree and let him choose the courses that he would like to study. So, for example, a student who's joining for BBA, he's really interested in psychology. Let him go and study that. Or let's say a student who's joining for BSc in physics, he is interested in accounting. Let him go and study that. Okay, so what this means is that we have these standalone higher education institutions which focuses on certain specific courses. Instead of having those specific courses, let them come ahead, or let them go ahead and become multidisciplinary nature. Now, this is not something relatively new, because this is exactly how the Western education system works out. So they work on what is called as the credit-based uh, system, where a student will enroll for a program, and then he's expected to study certain courses, as a result of which he will fulfill the required number of credits, and then he will become eligible. Another thing is the present degree format that we have in India. For UG programs, it's usually 3 years, and for engineering, it is 4 years. So this is going to be revamped. Okay, so we will have either 3-year degree programs, or we will have 4-year degree programs. Also, students will be given an opportunity for multiple entries and exits. So for example, let me give a scenario. I recollect a scenario sometime back. There was a student of mine who joined. His dad works with the central government. After 1 year of him completing the course here, due to his dad's official deputation, he was transferred from Bangalore to elsewhere. So the entire family had to relocate. But in the present scenario, what is happening is Bangalore University does not have a provision to, to migrate the course. So what happened was he had to discontinue his course. He had to discontinue his course. That 1 year of his effort that he's put in, it has gone down the drain. He had to relocate to another location, start all over again. So he had to start again from year one, okay, which was not quite fair, because the candidate had already invested his resources in terms of time, in terms of his effort, in terms of his finance into it. So in the present, with the new education policy coming into picture, what will happen is the students will have opportunity for multiple entries and multiple exits. So let's say a student joins, he studies for 1 year, and then he decides to take a break. He decides to, maybe work for a while. He could do that and then come back and then continue from where he dropped out. And also, if at all the student is discontinuing at different intervals, whatever he has studied so far, he would be given a recognition for that. So if he completes 1 year of study, he would be given a vocational certificate. If he completes 2 years of studies, he would be given an advanced diploma, 3 years bachelor's degree, 4 years bachelor's degree with research. Now, I feel this is a game changer for having a 4-year bachelor's degree, because one of the present areas that we as Indians are lacking behind is in research. So if you look at, especially if you look at China, they're investing very heavily into research. That the culture of research is inculcated into the education system right from school level. So I feel this is the game changer. We will have a lot of people who will be interested into research. So the conventional Indian thought is, if you're into research, it basically means you're a mad scientist. Okay, so this will help in breaking that stigma. This will help in breaking that barrier. Also, PG programs, the structure of PG programs has been revamped. Um, it would be made either 1 year or 2 year. Another major guide change that has been brought about is discontinuation of the MPhil program. So conventionally, if you have to go for a PhD program, you're expected to have an MPhil program. So with MPhil program taken off completely, if anyone is interested in pursuing research or by pursuing a PhD, then MPhil is not mandatory for them. Then some of the other major game changers which has been brought about by the education policy is the concept of affiliation. Typically, our Indian education systems and our institutions work is that you have a parent university, and then you have colleges. The colleges would affiliate themselves to the parent university, and that is how the structure works. Uh, for example, the institution where I work, Crystal Jayanti College, we are affiliated to Bangalore University, and Bangalore University would be our parent university, and our guidelines, our syllabus, etc., everything would have to come from our parent university. So for the college, there is a lot of dependency on the parent university in terms of examination, in terms of syllabus, in terms of guidelines, in terms of process, in terms of procedures. So, but if you look at the Western education system, They don't have this concept of affiliated colleges. They have standalone institutions. So this is going to be one major game changer. And in the next 15 years, the government hopes to give away with this concept of affiliating. Another game changer that the policy proposes is to have autonomous degree granting colleges. So colleges, they need not depend on a parent university to grant the degrees. So if the institution proves to be good, then they could become autonomous, and then they could become degree granting or degree awarding colleges. Then now this leaves us with a very important question: what would happen to the existing universities? What would happen to the existing education institutions which are in place? So these would be converted into research intensive universities or teaching intensive universities, depending on the resources that they have. So for example, if you look at IIT, they have a huge repository of resources available. They have some of the state of art equipments available. So for them, it would be good if they become a research intensive university. So depending on the caliber, depending on the resources that are available with the universities, they could either become research intensive or they could become teaching intensive universities. Also, the government proposes in converting the existing universities into what is called as MERU, Model Multidisciplinary Education and Research Universities. So these are some. Another major aspect that has been brought about is internationalization of education, which means our Indian institutes would be permitted to go ahead and start out their centers outside the country. So pretty soon we will have institutes like IIM, IIT, IISc going abroad, maybe to Dubai or maybe to London or maybe to New York, and starting their centers over there. At the same time, the government is encouraging, with this coming into picture, government will also open up our education sector for foreign universities to come and start their centers over here. So pretty soon, I would not be surprised if I see a center of London School of Economics here in Bangalore, because all this is going to be. Now what is going to happen is that this will all facilitate exchange of knowledge. This will all facilitate the exchange of resources. Okay. Another thing that has been brought about is ensuring that the fees of which is charged by these colleges and institutions are capped. And there is some regulation which has been enforced to the amount with which can be charged as fees. Then another proposal was, academic bank of credits. It's something like, a digi-locker for our courses. So let's say I studied in Bangalore, and after 1 year, I decide to relocate to Delhi. All that I have to do is I could transfer the credits of the courses that I've studied in Bangalore into my academic bank of credits, go to Delhi, and start from where I stopped. So the institutions across India would have access to one common repository. This will also rule out, or this will also help in eradicating forging of certificates, counterfeit certificates. So there are a lot of, we have a lot of nasty experiences where businesses would end up hiring potential graduates, and they realize that they have produced fake certificates. But when you have a common repository coming into picture, the corporates could always go back to this repository, this academic bank of credits, and cross-check the qualification of the individual. Not only that, this would facilitate a lot of a lot of flexibility in our education system. So, for example, there is this concept called as MOOC, massive open online courses. So you could today get onto the internet, pick up a course which is offered by any of these reputed institutes, study the course, do the certification, and then it would get added to your pool of courses. Okay, so for example, we have this platform which is called as edx.org, or in India we have a platform which is called as Swayam. So you could do any course under the sun. So I remember doing a course on EDX on symbology, which has got nothing to do with my domain. So all this is facilitated by ensuring there is flexibility in our education system. Another major thing that has been brought about is to have common standards, which is referred to as National Professional Standard for teachers. to make sure that all the teachers across India, in school as well as in colleges, they have certain professional guidelines. So in terms of their qualification, in terms of their experience, in terms of their experience, in terms of their qualification, etc. Then another major change that has been brought about, or which has been proposed, is that to make sure that the government brings about more funding into the education sector. So as of now, if you look at the government spending, it is around 4% of the total GDP, but this is not enough. Okay, so there is a proposal, there is a thrust to ensure that the government pumps up their spending in terms of the education sector. Then another thing was to have a National Education Technology Forum. This is going to be a common platform where some of the technical resources could be shared among the educational institutions. So some best practices, technical processes, technical know-hows, all could be made available to all the institutions across India on a common platform. So with that said and done, I just want to talk something about the prevailing education sector. Why do I claim this is, or why do we all, or what is the rationale behind by saying that the new education policy is a game changer? So I just want to bring up some statistics to you. These were statistics which was published by the MHRD, and these are statistics which is credible in nature. So if you look at in India, we have over 15 lakh. We have over 15 lakh schools. Okay, and if you look at the number of universities that we have in India, we have 993 universities, 41,000 colleges, and around 10,000 standalone institutes like IIM, IIT, IISc, etc. Now, if you actually work out the math, in school, we have around 24.7 crore students studying. But if you work out the math for the number of students who are studying in schools, in colleges, it is around 2.8. So, which means only 12% of our students are making it through for higher education. So let me just break it down in simple words. Out of every 100 students who's completing +2, only 12 of them are getting an opportunity to study in a university or a college. Now, the remaining 88% of them, it could be due to a number of reasons. Okay, so I keep telling this to children. If you have parents who are fortunate enough to put you in a college, if they're fortunate enough to put you into, you're really blessed because you are one among those 12% students. So which means there are a lot of gaps that we have to address. Now, when we are talking about in terms of 130 crore or 1.3 billion, we have to remember we occupy around 1/6 of the total population in the earth. Now, when we realize that, a good amount of our population is being left out, or they don't have access to higher education, it talks a lot. It talks, we have to start thinking about a future. If from a developing country, if we have to transition ourselves into a developed country, we have to start addressing our education sector very seriously. So, in that line, there's one more very interesting fact that I would like to bring up to you, and this is the ranking that has been brought about by Times Higher Education World University Ranking. Now, this is one of the top 3, or this is one of the 3 rankings that we have at a global level, at a not even a national level, above that, at a global level. So at rank, now this is the latest statistics these are the latest ranking figures that has been published. Your Oxford University is at first position. California Institute of Technology is at the second position. University of Cambridge, Stanford, and so on. Now, when you take up the entire list, okay, we have Indian Institute of Science, which is at a position between 300 to 350. So you understand, where does India stand at a global front in terms of education sector? So now let me go back to the previous slide. Now we have around 993 universities in India. Now, out of 993 universities that we have in India, for us to make it at the global level, it took one IISc, and the place where they're standing is that they're standing at a position between 300 and 350. So the point is this: we are not talking about quantity. Now we have to start focusing on quality. Our education institutions have to transform themselves. We are talking about a transition. We are not talking about huge numbers, but whatever numbers of universities and education institutions that we have in India, the thrust on them should be to provide quality education. It should be to provide a world-class education. These are some of the reasons why we have so much of brain drain in India. Why our elite class of students, they prefer to go abroad and then pursue their higher studies and all. So we have to really start revamping our education sector to make sure that we stand there. So in that line, so I've just quickly provided you with what the structure of the national education policy is, and I just brought about some figures, some statistics in that line. Now let's get on to understand the views and perspectives that the education policy has to bring about. Now, earlier in the opening remarks, I had mentioned that the reason why India went on to incorporate this education policy is that it was a part of the Sustainable Development Goals, which was proposed by the United Nations, and they're anticipating that by 2030, with the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals, all the countries would be on par in terms of quality of life. Okay, in terms of quality of life. Now, in simple words, we are talking about a new world order. We are talking about a scenario where the efforts of nations, the resources of nations have been now aligned on a common objective. If it has been aligned, or now they have to start thinking towards a common direction. Okay. Now, what I'm talking is that this may be some of the baby steps towards a one world government. Now, also, another aspect that we have to remember is one of the easiest way by which we could influence a community or a society at large is by starting off with their education. Because if you start off with the education, whatever reforms, whatever this that you bring in, you could make a huge difference in the behavior of the nation at large. Okay, so this could be, these are just my personal views, these are my personal perspectives, these are maybe some baby steps that we are seeing towards a one world government. Okay, so as of now, in the form of in a very nice way, it has all been framed, it has all been presented by saying that, look, we will have sustainable development goals. It will help you to improve your quality of life. It will help you to improve your GDP. It will help you to bring your people's living condition, etc., etc. But if you think, and if you break it down, and if you start thinking in smaller parts, what we are talking about is uniting their nations, bringing their resources together such that now they start working towards a common goal. Now, but if you look at the policy at large, the policy is for a noble cause. I don't see any potential harm in the policy as such. Now, another perspective that I would like to share with you is the roadmap ahead. So now, like I said, like how Sul Pastor had mentioned in his opening remarks, it's a game changer because the policy aims at bridging a lot of gaps in the education system. It talks about addressing a lot of areas in the education system. So one of the famous educational analysts, he had put forward the NEP in like this. He said it's a matter of change, it is a matter of choice, and it is a matter of chance. And if you look at almost all the top management people of businesses, if you look at all the educationists, they're coming and they're saying that it is really a game changer. So when you look at the education policy at large, it does not really have any potential threat, I feel it is definitely good. Now, however, now the policy is merely a roadmap. It is a form of a guide for the government for its course of action. But now there's a lot of onus on the government in terms of implementation. So if the policy has to realize its true objectives, if it has to serve the purpose, what it is meant for, then implementation is the key. Okay. Now, what this means is that there's a huge dependency on the government to invest into infrastructure. They have to start providing resources. They have to start, providing funding to these education institutions. Now, one of the major problems that I see is that with the entire economy slowing down due to the COVID crisis, I'm really skeptical about if the government will be able to fulfill its promise of 6% of the GDP for education. Next possible thing that I'm anticipating is that there could be a lot of psychological resistance. It is our very human nature. We are so accustomed with how life truly is. Any change in that equilibrium, we are not really very happy. So we could expect a lot of psychological resistance. The resistance could come from students. It could come from parents. It could come from teaching fraternity. It could come from management. It could come from regulatory framework, etc. Okay, so I'm anticipating there could be a lot of psychological resistance to this. Also, we are talking about a major change in the way how education is carried out, an area which has not been addressed for the last 20 to 30 years. So the transition, so there is a certain amount of time that would be needed for transitioning and then stabilizing into the new norm. So this period of transitioning could be quite confusing for students and parents. It may prove to be because they're already used to a certain system. Now, all of a sudden, so for example, if you, after your 10th, if you choose science stream for your +1 and +2, you know what your options are. Either you can go for engineering or you can go for medicine. Or if you go for commerce stream in +1 and +2, you know what your future options are. Either you could go for a BCom or a BBA. If you choose science stream, if you choose computer science, you know what your career options are. So from that era, when we are switching over to a multidisciplinary education system, it could prove to be quite confusing and quite confusing for students as well as parents. Now, with the education policy coming into picture, which with a lot of trust in the education institutions to become multidisciplinary, and then they have to offer a lot of resources, make available a lot of resources. Now the education institutions are challenged. They have to adapt, they have to innovate. So that could be proving to be quite burdensome for the education institutions. Now, talking about the minority institutions at large, since out of 4% of the population that we have in India, and if you look at that, a good amount of minority institutions are from the Christian community. One part that I personally felt was that since the policy focuses on a game changer, and they talk about uplifting the entire society at large, I personally feel that they could have made some special provisions for some of these minority institutions which are already doing exceedingly well in terms of serving their purpose. But on the other side, the policy on a whole does not have any threats to the minority institutions. I'm quite excited with the new education policy coming into picture because we have an opportunity to integrate Christian studies with secular education. So I'm talking about maybe a BBA, a Bachelors Degree with apologetics. Or I'm talking about a BBA degree in ministry, in Christian ministry, or in pastoral ministry. So I'm seeing a huge potential in this, where we could bring about some of our Christian studies into secular education. And for example, a student the other day was sharing that he's going to US because he has an opportunity to study MBA in theology. I was really shocked. I mean, MBA in theology. And he said there was a university called Nazareth University, which is offering that program. So with the new NEP coming into picture, with our education becoming multidisciplinary, there's a lot of opportunity for us to bring about education, Christian education into the mainline education. So we could introduce a lot of Bible-centric subjects. We could teach our ethos. We could teach our moral systems to students using this opportunity. At the same time, there is also a provision in the NEP which talks about bringing institutions under scrutiny in terms of their function, in terms of their governance. So I'm not really sure. Like I said, the onus is now on the implementation. This could be a little worrisome, maybe for the management. But like I said, again, I see a huge potential in the education policy. Especially for churches, they could partner with education institutions, and then they could offer some of our Christian studies along with the mainline education. Now, talking about minority institutions, I just want to talk about my institution's success story. How the vision and the streamlining of the leadership of the college institution managed to transform itself. So the institution started way back in 1999, and we started with 9 students with one course. Today we have around 8,000 students, 8,000 plus students. We were considered as the youngest autonomous college in India, and according to 2020's NIRF ranking, we were one of the top 200. And the surprising fact was that we were the only private institution to make it to this level. And in fact, Times today, it has rated our institution as the emerging college of the century at the national level. So my point is that some of our minority institutions, they're living to the truest calling of our Lord Jesus Christ, and they're trying to serve his purpose. They're trying to fulfill his objectives and mission, and they are doing extremely well. So in that line, I feel the new education policy has got a huge potential for the Christian community as well as the minority institutions. So with that note, I want to thank all of you for your patient listening. At the same time, I want to thank the leadership of Bethel AG Church as well as Pastor for providing me this wonderful opportunity to share my perspectives as well as thoughts. So over to you, Pastor.
Thank you so much, Professor Suku Thomas. If you will just want to stop sharing the screen, then thank you. That's a wonderful presentation that you have given us. I know you have spent quite a lot of time and efforts to compile all this together. And beyond that, I'm so glad that God has filled you with the spirit of wisdom to, in fact, evaluate it in the light of Christian minority institutions especially, and minority institutions being benefited from it. And I'm wondering if there will be others who would want a counseling session from a person of your stature to help them understand how they could, in a confusing environment in the near future, have clear perspectives on choosing important things for their future. Thank you so much. We are so happy. There are a couple of questions that I see in the chat box. Sister Shiny Alex says, when will the new education policy come into force?
The policy has already been passed at the central level, which means it's been already endorsed and passed at the central government. Now the onus is on, because if you look at the constitutional list, we have the central list, we have the state list, and then we have the concurrent list. So education is in the concurrent list, which means the onus is both on the central government as well as the state government. Now it has already been passed in the parliament. Now it is up to the state governments to adopt. So for example, Karnataka state government is the first state to come forward, and they have effective from 1st of August, they have given a heads up to NEP, which means we would be, or Karnataka state government would be one of the first governments which would be aligning its educational structures and reforms in line with the NEP. So now the onus is on the NEP, on the state governments.
Wonderful. There are people who are just at the verge of getting into such multidisciplinary changes that as we just mentioned. There are students studying in 12th standard, there are others. So there is another question. If you want to start a business, the question is, if you want to start a business, is it fine to be an expert in a field and then go on for business? So I think what Joel is trying to figure out is to be an entrepreneur. What would be a good suggestion that you have? Is there any specific course that you would expect from somebody who would want to be an entrepreneur further on in life?
Entrepreneurship, I feel, is something which cannot be taught. It is something which has to be it's something someone has to be very passionate about. So it's only then, see, being an entrepreneur is not an easy job, because there are a lot of hardships that we have to endure. There are a lot of roadblocks that we have to meet. So unless and until you're passionate about what you're doing, it would be very difficult for us to. So, for example, if you look at Flipkart's success story, Binny Bansal and Sachin Bansal, they started way back in 2006 by selling books. But look where the firm has grown out to be today. So unless and until you're really passionate about what you're doing, it is not really easy. So entrepreneurship is something which cannot be taught, but maybe the practices of business can be learned by studying maybe a course like BBA or BCom. But to be an entrepreneur, there are certain skill sets that one must possess. You have to be patient, you have to be persistent, you have to be creative. So those will depend on the personality type.
Perfect. Like you said, it cannot be taught, it has to be caught. All right. Just I have a quick thought on that. When I was talking to a business person, entrepreneur in South Korea, he was mentioning that he had a doctorate in music. And then to be an entrepreneur after getting a doctoral qualification in music, it was like, why did you do that? And so he was giving another perspective in the same line of thought that you are saying. Brother Alex Philip asked, the proposed changes are to be implemented to all the boards like ICSE, IGSE, all that.
IGCSE, since it's a foreign board, IGSCC, I'm not really sure, because IGSCC, they pick up their guidelines from Cambridge. So IGSC, I'm not really sure. But ICSE and CBSE, since these are bodies which comes under the purview of the central government, it would be up to the onus of the governments to go about incorporating all this. But with the central government passing the bill, they will have to go about realigning all this. So now this is something which has to happen in phases. But maybe a full-fledged implementation of the NEP that we are seeing in this scale, it may take 20 years down the lane, because we have to do it gradually. We have to ensure that we have the adequate infrastructure to facilitate this transition. Then we have to equip the teaching fraternity. So then once the teaching fraternity is equipped, then we have to move on to the students and the parents. So it's something which is likely to happen gradually. So I'm not really sure if there's a timeline given as such as to when these changes would be incorporated by ICSE and CBSE.
Thank you. It's perfect. One final quick question. It's about time. 6:45 is our scheduled time. Another minute to go. The last question I would like to ask is, should the students clear SAT exams?
I'm not really sure the expansion of SAT, but in the US guidelines, they have what is called as a scholastics aptitude test, which is what they have to take, for applying for all the. So it depends on the expansion of SAT that the person is intending.
So Shiny should help us understand if scholastic aptitude test is what you actually mean, or is there something else that you have with SAT? But I just want to tell you, Professor Suku Thomas Samuel, that there are so many people who are really so happy that this description that was very clear and was very informative, that you have spent so much of time and efforts to compile it for us. Those of us who are not able to join us from the beginning, you can definitely watch it again, and you can also share it with your friends, because there may be people from our community who may be benefited by this. Thank you so much, Professor Suku Thomas Samuel. We hope that there will be others also, other programs also that we would like to host in the near future, because I'm very excited with the kind of material that you bring for us. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you so much.
And once again, God bless you, all of us who joined. May the Lord bless you. Praise the Lord. And have a wonderful day.